The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Carter and Associates Marketing Agency, located on the 20th floor of a sleek glass building in downtown Seattle. Marcus Carter stood with his arms crossed, staring out at the grey November sky that seemed to mirror the storm brewing inside his chest. At 34, he had built his boutique marketing firm from nothing, clawing his way up from a cramped studio apartment in Capitol Hill to this prestigious office space overlooking Elliott Bay. "Mr. Carter, your 3 o'clock is here?" His assistant Jenny's voice crackled through the intercom. Marcus turned from the window, straightening his navy Tom Ford suit. "Send them in." The door opened, and Jenny ushered in a woman Marcus had never seen before. She was perhaps in her late 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing a simple grey cardigan over black slacks. But what immediately caught Marcus's attention, what he couldn't stop staring at, were her hands. They were scarred, badly, burned scars from what Marcus could tell, covering both hands in a patchwork of discolored textured skin. The fingers seemed to move stiffly as she clutched a worn leather portfolio to her chest. "Mr. Carter, I'm Elena Rodriguez," she said, her voice steady despite the nervousness Marcus detected in her dark brown eyes. "Thank you for seeing me." Marcus realized he'd been staring and quickly gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Please, sit down. Though I have to say, Ms. Rodriguez, I'm not sure why you're here. My assistant didn't mention what this meeting was about." Eleanor settled into the chair, carefully placing her portfolio on her lap. "I'm a graphic designer. I've been following your agency's work for 2 years now, and I wanted to show you my portfolio. I know you're not actively hiring, but..." "You're right, we're not," Marcus interrupted, his tone sharper than he intended. He had a pitch to prepare for Velocity Sports, a potential client worth $500,000, and he didn't have time for unsolicited portfolio reviews. Elena's face fell slightly, but she persevered. "I understand, but if you could just look at a few samples..." "Ms. Rodriguez," Marcus said, leaning back in his leather chair with an expression that he knew looked condescending. "I'm going to be honest with you. This is one of the most competitive markets in the country. Our clients expect perfection, and in this business, presentation is everything." His eyes flickered, just for a second, down to her hands. The room seemed to freeze. Eleanor followed his gaze and then looked back up at him, her jaw tightening. "My hands don't affect my work, Mr. Carter. I use specialized tools, and I'm sure you've found ways to adapt," Marcus said dismissively, standing up to signal the meeting was over. "But we work with Fortune 500 companies. Client meetings, presentations, first impressions matter. I'm sure you understand." The words hung in the air like poison. Marcus watched the color drain from Elena's face, replaced by a flush of humiliation and anger. She stood slowly, clutching her portfolio so tightly her scarred knuckles went white. "I understand perfectly," she said quietly, her voice trembling with barely controlled emotion. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Carter." She turned and walked toward the door, her posture rigid with wounded pride. As she reached for the handle, she paused without turning around. "You know what's interesting?" Elena said. "I survived a fire when I was 19. I was trapped in my college dorm, and I got these scars pulling my roommate out through a window. She's alive because of these hands." She turned slightly, just enough for Marcus to see her profile. "But I guess saving someone's life doesn't count as much as a good first impression." The door clicked shut behind her, and Marcus stood alone in his office, the rain now falling harder against the windows. For a moment, just a brief, uncomfortable moment, he felt something twist in his gut. Guilt, regret. But he shook it off, returning to his desk and the Velocity Sports pitch that demanded his attention. He had a business to run. He couldn't afford to be sentimental. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of meetings, late nights, and increasingly frantic phone calls. The Velocity Sports pitch, which Marcus had been so confident about, fell through spectacularly. They went with a larger firm in Portland. Then Morrison Tech, another major client, decided not to renew their contract, citing creative differences that Marcus suspected meant they found his ideas stale and uninspired. By early December, Marcus found himself staring at spreadsheets that painted an increasingly dire picture. Carter and Associates was bleeding money. 3 of his 8 employees had already left for more stable opportunities, and the remaining 5 were clearly updating their resumes. "Marcus, we need to talk," said his business partner and best friend since college, David Chen, settling into the chair across from Marcus's desk, the same chair Elena had sat in 3 weeks ago. "If this is about the budget cuts, it's about survival," David interrupted, his usually cheerful face drawn and serious. "We've lost 3 clients this quarter. If we don't land something major in the next month, we're done. I'm talking bankruptcy, Marcus. Liquidation. Everything we've built, gone." Marcus rubbed his temples, feeling a headache building behind his eyes. "I know. I'm working on it." "Are you?" David leaned forward. "Because from where I'm sitting, you seem more interested in maintaining your image than actually doing the work. When was the last time you created something, Marcus? Something that wasn't just a recycled concept with a new coat of paint?" The words stung because they were true. Somewhere along the way, Marcus had stopped being a creative and started being a businessman. He'd stopped taking risks, stopped pushing boundaries, stopped caring about anything except the bottom line and his reputation. "The Anderson account," Marcus said suddenly, grasping at straws. "The coffee chain expansion. If we can land that..." Sarah Anderson specifically requested a full brand redesign, including logo, packaging, and digital presence. "That's not your specialty, Marcus. That's why we used to have a full design team. Before we let them all go to cut costs." Marcus slumped in his chair, staring at the ceiling. "So what do we do?" David stood up, heading toward the door. "I don't know. But you better figure it out fast. I've got a wife and 2 kids to think about. If this ship is going down, I need to know so I can jump before we hit the water." After David left, Marcus sat in the gathering darkness of his office, watching the city lights flicker on below as evening settled over Seattle. The Space Needle glowed in the distance, a beacon of the success and innovation this city represented. Success that was slipping through his fingers. His phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from Sarah Anderson's assistant, confirming their pitch meeting for the following week. The Anderson account could save everything if he could deliver something extraordinary, something he hadn't been able to create in years. Marcus opened his laptop and stared at the blank screen, cursor blinking mockingly. Nothing came. No ideas, no inspiration, just the crushing weight of his own mediocrity pressing down on his chest. In desperation, he began searching through design portfolios online, hoping for some spark of inspiration. He scrolled through hundreds of images, corporate logos, brand identities, packaging designs, all of them competent but uninspired, just like his own work had become. Then, almost by accident, his search led him to a small portfolio website with a simple title, Elena Rodriguez Design. Marcus's hand froze on the mouse. He told himself he should close the window, keep searching, find inspiration somewhere else. But curiosity got the better of him, and he clicked through to the gallery. What he saw took his breath away. The designs were extraordinary, bold, innovative, emotionally resonant in a way that corporate design rarely achieved. There was a coffee packaging concept that used hand-drawn illustrations to tell the story of the bean's journey from farm to cup. A tech company logo that somehow managed to feel both cutting-edge and warmly human. A restaurant brand identity that made Marcus's mouth water just looking at the menu designs. Every piece showed not just technical skill, but genuine artistry, creativity that couldn't be taught or faked. This was the work of someone who understood that design wasn't just about making things look good, it was about making people feel something. Marcus scrolled back to the top of the page and stared at Elena's profile photo. She was smiling at the camera, her scarred hands visible as she held a stylus over a tablet. The memory of their meeting came flooding back, and with it, a wave of shame so intense it made him feel physically ill. He remembered the look on her face when he'd dismissed her, the quiet dignity with which she'd told him about saving her roommate's life, the way her voice had trembled with hurt and anger. He'd been cruel, not just professionally discourteous, but genuinely, unnecessarily cruel to someone who'd only wanted a chance to show what she could do. And now, looking at her work, Marcus realized that Elena Rodriguez might be the most talented designer he'd ever encountered, certainly more talented than anyone currently on his rapidly shrinking team. The question was, after what he'd done, would she ever consider working with him? Marcus stared at the contact form on Eleanor's website for a long time, his finger hovering over the keyboard. Pride told him to close the laptop and find another solution. But desperation and something else, something that might have been the first stirring of actual remorse, made him start typing. "Dear Ms. Rodriguez," he began, then stopped and deleted it. Too formal, too impersonal after what had happened. "Elena," he started again, "you probably don't want to hear from me, and I wouldn't blame you if you deleted this email without reading it. But I need to tell you something." He paused, unsure how to continue. How do you apologize for something like that? How do you ask for help from someone you've hurt so badly? Outside his window, Seattle sparkled in the December night, beautiful and indifferent to his struggle. Marcus took a deep breath and kept writing, knowing that what he said next might determine not just the fate of his business, but the kind of person he would choose to be going forward. The email took him 45 minutes to write, and when he finally pressed send, his hands were shaking. Now all he could do was wait. Elena Rodriguez sat in her small studio apartment in the Fremont neighborhood, nursing a cup of tea and staring at her laptop screen. The apartment was modest, but carefully decorated with her own artwork, watercolor paintings on the walls, hand-lettered quotes on small canvases, a collection of design books stacked neatly on floating shelves. String lights draped across the ceiling gave the room a warm, cozy glow against the cold December night outside. She'd just finished her shift at Café Alma, a small coffee shop on 36th Street, where she worked 4 days a week to pay the bills. Her hands ached. They always did in cold weather, the scar tissue tightening uncomfortably. She flexed her fingers slowly, performing the exercises her physical therapist had taught her years ago. Her phone pinged with an email notification. Elena almost ignored it, assuming it was another spam message or a rejection from one of the dozens of design jobs she'd applied for over the past month. But something made her check. The sender name made her freeze. Marcus Carter. Elena's first instinct was to delete it without reading. The memory of that humiliating meeting 3 weeks ago still stung. She'd replayed it in her mind 100 times, each time feeling the same flush of embarrassment and anger. The way he'd looked at her hands, the dismissive tone, the casual cruelty of someone who'd never had to fight for anything. But curiosity won out. She clicked the email open. "Elena?" it began. Not Ms. Rodriguez, she noticed. At least he'd dropped the fake formality. "You probably don't want to hear from me. And I wouldn't blame you if you deleted this email without reading it. But I need to tell you something. I was wrong. Not just professionally wrong, but morally wrong. What I said to you in my office was inexcusable. I judged you based on appearance rather than ability, and in doing so, I revealed my own shallow character and limited vision. You came to me offering your talent, and I responded with prejudice and cruelty. I've spent the last 3 weeks telling myself I was just being practical, that I was protecting my business, but the truth is, I was being a coward. I was so worried about what my clients might think that I forgot the most basic principle of what we do. Good work speaks for itself. Tonight, I found your portfolio online. Your work is extraordinary, the kind of creative, meaningful design I haven't seen in years. The kind of work I used to dream of creating before I got so caught up in playing it safe. I know I have no right to ask you for anything after how I treated you, but I'm asking anyway because my business is failing, and I think you might be the only person who can help save it. More importantly, you might be the person who reminds me why I got into this field in the first place. If you're willing to meet with me again, and I would completely understand if you're not, I'd like to discuss a project, a real project, not an internship or a trial position. I'm pitching the Anderson Coffee account next week, and I need a designer who can bring genuine creativity and heart to the work. Someone who understands that design is about more than just aesthetics. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm just asking for a chance to prove that I can learn from my mistakes. Marcus Carter. Elena read the email 3 times, her emotions churning. Part of her wanted to write back with a scathing rejection, to tell him exactly where he could put his project and his apology. Another part of her was touched by the honesty of the message, the lack of excuses or self-justification. But the practical part of her brain, the part that had learned to be pragmatic after years of fighting for opportunities, was calculating. The Anderson Coffee account was major. If she could contribute to landing that client, it would be a legitimate credit she could use to build her career, and she did need the work. Cafe Alma paid her rent, but just barely. She looked down at her hands, the scar tissue catching the light from her laptop screen. These hands had pulled her best friend Sarah from a burning building. These hands had helped her relearn how to write, how to draw, how to use a computer mouse and a stylus. These hands had created every piece in her portfolio. Marcus Carter had judged these hands and found them wanting, but he'd been wrong about what they could do. Maybe it was time to show him just how wrong. Elena opened a new email and began typing. Mr. Carter, I appreciate your email and your honesty. You're right that what happened in your office was hurtful and unprofessional. But I also appreciate that you've taken the time to acknowledge it. I'm willing to meet with you to discuss the Anderson project. However, I need to be clear about my terms. This would be a freelance contract with a clear scope of work and fair compensation. I'm not interested in a trial period or working for exposure. If my designs contribute to winning the account, I receive full credit in your pitch presentation and in any subsequent client materials. You treat me as the professional I am, regardless of your personal feelings about my appearance. If you can agree to these terms, I'm available to meet this Wednesday at 2 p.m. I suggest we meet at Cafe Alma in Fremont, where I work. That way, we're on neutral ground. Elena Rodriguez. She read it over once, made sure the tone was professional but firm, and hit send before she could second-guess herself. The response came back in less than 5 minutes. All 3 terms accepted without hesitation. I'll see you Wednesday at 2 p.m. And Elena, thank you for giving me this chance. I won't waste it. Marcus. Elena closed her laptop and leaned back against her couch, exhausted from the emotional roller coaster of the evening. Outside her window, she could hear the sounds of Fremont at night. Distant traffic, someone's music playing, the occasional bark of a dog. Normal sounds of normal life, but something had shifted. She could feel it. A sense of possibility opening up where before there had only been closed doors and rejection. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Chen, her college roommate and the person she'd saved from the fire 7 years ago. Sarah was now a successful physical therapist in Portland, happily married with a baby on the way. "Hey you! Just thinking about you. How's the job hunt going?" Elena smiled and typed back, "Actually, I think I might have just caught a break. Tell you more later. Love you." "Love you too, hero. Whatever it is, you deserve it." Elena looked at her hands again, flexing the fingers slowly. Yes, they were scarred. Yes, they sometimes hurt. Yes, they made some people uncomfortable or judgmental. But they were her hands. They had saved a life. They had created beautiful things. They had refused to give up, even when giving up would have been easier. And now, maybe, they were going to save a business and teach a careless man a lesson about what really matters. Wednesday arrived cold and grey, with the drizzle that was typical for Seattle in December. Marcus arrived at Cafe Alma 15 minutes early, nervous in a way he hadn't been since his first client pitch a decade ago. The cafe was small but charming, with exposed brick walls, mismatched vintage furniture, and the rich smell of coffee filling the air. Local artwork hung on the walls, and a chalkboard menu displayed drinks with names like the Fremont Troll and Aurora Avenue Awakening. Marcus ordered a black coffee and took a seat at a table near the window, watching the street outside. A few minutes later, the door chimed and Eleanor walked in. She was wearing jeans, boots, and a forest green sweater, her hair down around her shoulders this time. She carried a large portfolio bag and a messenger bag over her shoulder. When she spotted Marcus, her expression was neutral, guarded. "Ms. Rodriguez," Marcus said, standing up. "Elena is fine," she said, setting her bags down and shrugging off her coat. "I'm going to grab a coffee. Do you need anything?" "I'm good, thank you." Marcus watched as Elena walked to the counter and greeted the barista, a young guy with a beard and several tattoos, with obvious familiarity. They chatted while he made her drink, laughing about something Marcus couldn't hear. When she returned to the table, she was carrying what looked like a vanilla latte with intricate foam art on top. "You work here," Marcus said as she sat down. It wasn't a question. 4 days a week, Elena confirmed. "It pays the bills while I build my freelance work. Plus, Marco makes the best coffee in Seattle, and the owner doesn't mind if I work on designs during slow periods. And the artwork on the walls, is that? Some of it's mine, yes. Rosa, the owner, gives local artists a chance to display their work. It's one of the reasons I love this place." There was a brief, awkward silence. Marcus realized Elena was waiting for him to start, to explain why they were here and what he wanted. He'd been the one to ask for this meeting. The burden was on him to make it worth her time. "Right," he said, pulling out his own laptop. "So, the Anderson Coffee account. Let me give you the background." For the next 20 minutes, Marcus explained the situation. Anderson Coffee was a family-owned chain with 12 locations around Washington state. Sarah Anderson, the founder's daughter, had recently taken over as CEO and wanted to modernize the brand while maintaining its local, community-focused identity. They were planning to expand to Oregon and California within the next 2 years. "The problem," Marcus said, "is that every pitch I've been working on feels generic, corporate. It doesn't capture what makes Anderson special, that sense of being part of the community, of coffee as a gathering place rather than just a caffeine delivery system." Elena had been listening quietly, occasionally taking notes. Now she looked up from her notepad, her dark eyes thoughtful. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Why did you start your agency?" The question caught Marcus off guard. What do you mean? Why did you become a marketer? What made you want to do this work in the first place?" Marcus opened his mouth to give a standard answer about building brands and solving problems, but something in Elena's steady gaze made him stop and actually think about it. "I wanted to tell stories," he said finally. "I grew up in a small town in Idaho, and my dad owned a hardware store. It was this old-fashioned place that had everything, lumber, tools, gardening supplies, you name it. But big box stores started moving in, and they were cheaper and more convenient, and slowly our customers stopped coming." "What happened?" Eleanor asked softly. "Dad closed the store when I was 16. It broke his heart. And I remember thinking that if someone had helped him tell his story, the story of 3 generations of Carters running that store, of knowing our customers by name, of my grandfather teaching people how to fix things instead of just selling them new ones, maybe it would have made a difference." Marcus realized he'd never told anyone this story before, not even David. He'd been so focused on building his reputation and his client list that he'd forgotten the reason he'd wanted to build anything at all. "So you wanted to help businesses like your father's," Elena said. "You wanted to make sure their stories got told." "Yeah," Marcus said, feeling something loosen in his chest. "Yeah, I did. But somewhere along the way, I stopped telling stories and started just making ads." Eleanor nodded slowly, taking a sip of her latte. Okay, so let's tell Anderson's story. The real one. She pulled out her tablet and stylus, and for the next 2 hours they worked. Elena sketched while Marcus talked about the Anderson family, about Sarah's vision, about what made the coffee shop special. She asked questions that made him think differently about the brand, about coffee, about what people were really looking for when they walked into a local cafe instead of a Starbucks. "It's not about the coffee," Elena said at one point, her stylus moving confidently across the screen, despite the scars on her hands. "I mean, it is, but it isn't. It's about belonging. It's about having a place where the barista knows your name, where you can sit and work or meet a friend or just exist without feeling like you're being rushed out the door." "Yes," Marcus said, feeling excited in a way he hadn't in years. "Exactly that." By 4 o'clock, Elena had created rough mock-ups of 3 different design directions, each one capturing something essential about what Anderson coffee represented. One used hand-drawn illustrations of local Seattle landmarks, integrating them into the coffee cups and packaging. Another played with the idea of coffee as connection, with designs that looked like conversation bubbles and bridges. The third was minimalist but warm, using earth tones and simple typography that felt both modern and timeless. All 3 were better than anything Marcus had come up with on his own. "These are incredible," he said, genuinely amazed. "How did you—" "I listened," Eleanor said simply. "You told me what matters to this client, and I designed for that instead of trying to impose my own vision. Good design serves the client's story, not the designer's ego." The words were pointed, and Marcus felt them land. "That's what I was doing wrong," he said quietly. "I was designing for my own ego, for my reputation." "Yeah," Elena said, starting to pack up her things. "You were, but you don't have to keep doing it." As she stood to leave, Marcus found himself not wanting the meeting to end. "Elena, wait. I know we agreed on a freelance contract for this project, but have you ever thought about a more permanent position, not just as a designer, but as a creative partner?" Elena stopped, her hand on her messenger bag. "Are you offering me a job, Mr. Carter?" "I'm offering you a partnership," Marcus said, the words coming out before he'd fully thought them through. But as soon as he said them, he knew they were right. Carter and Associates needs to become something more than it is. And I think you're the person who can help make that happen. Not in spite of everything you've been through, but because of it. You understand what it means to fight for something, to not give up, even when people tell you you're not good enough. Elena was quiet for a long moment, studying his face. "Let's see how the Anderson pitch goes," she finally said. "If we land the account, we can talk about what comes next. But Marcus—" She used his first name deliberately, he noticed. "If we're going to work together, you need to understand something. My hands don't make me less capable. They make me more determined. They remind me every day that I survived something terrible and came out stronger. If you can't see that as an asset, then we're going to have problems." "I see it," Marcus said, and he meant it. "I should have seen it from the start, but I was too busy looking at the surface to see what was underneath. That won't happen again." Elena nodded once, then slung her bag over her shoulder. "I'll have full mock-ups ready by Friday. We can meet at your office to review them before the pitch on Monday." "Perfect. And Elena, thank you for giving me this chance." She paused at the door, glancing back with the hint of a smile. "Don't thank me yet. Thank me after we win the account." Then she was gone, leaving Marcus sitting alone in the cafe with his cold coffee and a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time: hope. 3 months later, spring was beginning to transform Seattle. Cherry blossoms dotted the university district. The Space Needle stood bright against increasingly frequent blue skies, and the city's famous gloom was giving way to the kind of crisp, beautiful days that reminded people why they lived in the Pacific Northwest. The Anderson coffee account launch had been a massive success. The new branding rolled out across all 12 locations in early February, and customer response was overwhelmingly positive. Social media posts featuring Elena's hand-drawn illustrations went viral, with people praising the authentic, community-focused approach. Sales were up 23%, and Sarah Anderson had already fast-tracked the expansion into Portland and Vancouver, BC. But more than the metrics or the praise, what mattered to Marcus was that the work felt meaningful again. He was telling stories that mattered, building brands that had soul, and none of it would have been possible without Elena. They were in the newly renovated office space now, still on the 20th floor, still overlooking Elliott Bay, but transformed. The sterile corporate aesthetic was gone, replaced by something warmer and more creative. Local artwork covered the walls, including several of Elena's pieces. A section of one wall was painted with chalkboard paint, covered in sketches and ideas. Comfortable seating areas encouraged collaboration over formal meetings. Most significantly, the name on the door had changed. It now read, Carter and Rodriguez Creative Partners. "It feels weird seeing my name up there," Elena said, standing beside Marcus as they looked at the new sign mounted on the glass door. "Good weird, but weird." "You earned it," Marcus said simply. "Everything we've accomplished in the last 3 months has been as much your work as mine. More, honestly. You brought the creative vision. I just helped execute it." They'd formalized the partnership 2 weeks after landing the Anderson account. Elena had initially been hesitant, worried that accepting Marcus's offer might be too much too fast. But David and Claire had convinced her that it was the right move, and the papers were signed in early January. Now, Carter and Rodriguez had 8 employees again. 4 they'd rehired from before, and 4 new people, including 2 designers Elena had recruited from her network. The office buzzed with creative energy that had been absent for years. "Morning meeting in 5 minutes," David called from the conference room. "We need to go over the Cascade Bikes pitch." Eleanor grabbed her tablet, and she and Marcus headed into the conference room, where the team was already gathering. Marcus watched Elena take her seat at the head of the table, a position she'd initially resisted but had gradually grown comfortable with. "Okay," Elena said, pulling up designs on the big screen. "Here's where we are with Cascade Bikes. They want to target younger, environmentally conscious consumers without alienating their core customer base of serious cyclists. My thinking is we emphasize the sustainability angle through the visual language." As she walked the team through her concepts, Marcus found himself reflecting on how much his own perspective had shifted. He used to judge the quality of his work by the prestige of his clients and the size of his contracts. Now he measured success by whether the work told an authentic story, whether it made a real connection with people. Elena had taught him that. Not through lectures or criticism, but through example, by showing him what it looked like to create work that had both craft and heart. After the meeting, as people dispersed to their desks, Marcus pulled Elena aside. "Can we talk in my office for a minute?" "Sure," Elena said, following him across the open floor plan to his private office. Marcus closed the door and gestured for Elena to sit. She did, looking slightly concerned. "Is everything okay?" she asked. "Everything's great," Marcus assured her. "Actually, that's what I wanted to talk about. The Anderson account has led to 3 more inquiries from companies looking for similar work. We're in a position to be selective about clients, to work with companies whose values align with ours." "That's amazing," Elena said, smiling. "I love that we can be choosy now." "Me too," Marcus agreed. "But I also wanted to say something else, something personal." Elena's expression became more serious, attentive. "When you first came to my office back in November," Marcus began, "I judged you in about 30 seconds. I saw your hands and decided you weren't good enough for my company. I was so focused on surface appearances and what I thought my clients wanted that I almost missed working with the most talented designer I've ever met." "Marcus, let me finish," he said gently. "What I did was wrong, but it also made me realize how much of my life I'd been spending on surfaces, building a reputation instead of building something real, impressing people instead of connecting with them. I'd forgotten why I wanted to do this work in the first place. He paused, gathering his thoughts. You didn't just save my business, Elena. You reminded me how to be a person who deserves to have a business. Someone who values people for who they are, not what they look like or how they might make me look. And I wanted to thank you for that, for being patient with me while I learned lessons I should have already known. Eleanor was quiet for a moment, her scarred fingers tracing patterns on the arm of her chair. When she spoke, her voice was soft but firm. I appreciate you saying that, Marcus, I really do, but I want you to understand something too. Those first few months after the fire, when I was learning to use my hands again, people treated me differently. Some pitied me. Some were uncomfortable around me. Some, like you in that first meeting, wrote me off entirely. She looked up, meeting his eyes. And it hurt. Every single time it hurt. But it also taught me that the only opinion that really matters is my own. I know what these hands can do. I know what I survived. I know my value, whether other people see it or not. You shouldn't have had to prove that, Marcus said quietly. No, I shouldn't have, Elena agreed. But we don't always get to choose our battles. We just get to choose how we fight them. I chose to keep creating, to keep improving, to build a portfolio so good that eventually someone would look past their prejudices and see the work. I'm glad I finally saw it, Marcus said. Even if I needed desperation to open my eyes. Elena smiled slightly. Sometimes that's what it takes. Sometimes we need to hit bottom before we're willing to change. The important thing is that you did change, and you keep changing. I've watched you become more thoughtful, more open, more willing to admit when you don't know something. I learned that from watching you work, Marcus admitted. The way you ask questions, the way you listen to clients, the way you're never too proud to say, I don't understand yet. Help me understand. That's real confidence. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the sounds of the office filtering through the door, keyboards clicking, phones ringing, someone laughing at something. Can I tell you something else? Elena said suddenly. That day I came to your office the first time. I almost turned around 3 times before I even made it to your floor. I was so nervous. I'd been rejected so many times, and part of me knew you might reject me too. But you came anyway, Marcus said. I came anyway, Eleanor confirmed, because I'd made a promise to myself after the fire. I promised that I wouldn't let fear stop me from trying, that I wouldn't let other people's limitations become my limitations. And even when you did exactly what I was afraid you'd do, even when you judged me and dismissed me, I didn't let it stop me. I kept creating. I kept building my portfolio. I kept looking for the next opportunity. That's extraordinary, Marcus said, and he meant it. That kind of resilience, that refusal to give up, that's not something that can be taught. No, Elena agreed. It can only be earned. Usually through experiences we wish we'd never had. Oh, Marcus thought about that, about the fire that had scarred her hands but also forged her character, about the months of physical therapy and relearning basic tasks, about the countless rejections and dismissals she must have faced. I wish I could go back to that first meeting, he said. I wish I could undo what I said. But you can't, Elena said pragmatically. None of us can change the past. We can only learn from it and do better going forward. And you are doing better, Marcus. Every day I see you making different choices, treating people with more respect, valuing substance over surface. She stood up, preparing to return to work. That's all anyone can ask for. Not perfection, but growth. Not never making mistakes, but learning from them. As she reached the door, Marcus called out, Elena, thank you for everything. She turned back with a genuine smile. You're welcome. Now let's get back to work. Those Cascade Bikes designs aren't going to finish themselves. That evening, Marcus decided to do something he'd been putting off for months. He drove to the parking garage where he stored his father's old truck, a 1975 Ford F-150 that his dad had given him before closing the hardware store. Marcus had been keeping it covered and barely used, a relic of a past he'd been trying to move beyond. But now he uncovered it, started the engine that rumbled to life after a moment's hesitation, and drove it home to his condo in Capitol Hill. He parked it in his assigned spot, where his sleek BMW usually sat, and just looked at it for a while. The truck was scratched and dented, practical rather than beautiful, but it had carried lumber and supplies for 3 generations of Carters. It had served a purpose beyond just looking good, kind of like Elena's hands, Marcus thought, scarred and marked by experience, but capable of creating beautiful things precisely because of what they'd endured. He pulled out his phone and called his father for the first time in 6 months. They'd had a falling out when Marcus had last visited Idaho. His father had accused him of becoming too focused on money and status, and Marcus had responded with anger because the truth hurt. "Marcus," his father answered, surprise evident in his voice. "Is everything okay?" "Yeah, Dad, everything's okay. Better than okay, actually. I wanted to apologize for how I acted last time we talked. You were right. I'd lost my way." There was a long pause. "What changed?" "Someone reminded me why I started doing this work in the first place," Marcus said, leaning against the old truck. "Someone who understood what it meant to build something that matters." They talked for an hour, the longest conversation they'd had in years. Marcus told his father about Elena, about the Anderson account, about the partnership and the new direction of the company. His father listened, and Marcus could hear the pride in his voice when he said, "That sounds like the son I raised, the one who cared about more than just the bottom line." "I'm trying to be that person again," Marcus said. "It's harder than I thought it would be, but it's also more satisfying." "That's real success," his father said. "Not what your bank account says, but whether you can look yourself in the mirror and feel good about the person looking back." After they hung up, Marcus sat in his truck for a while longer, thinking about scars and second chances, about judgment and growth, about the unexpected ways people come into our lives and change everything. 6 months after the Anderson account launch, Carter and Rodriguez was thriving. They'd landed 4 more major clients, all companies that valued authentic storytelling over generic corporate messaging. The team had grown to 12 people, and they'd just signed a lease on additional office space on the floor below. But the success Marcus was most proud of wasn't measured in revenue or client lists. It was measured in the culture they'd built. A workplace where people were valued for their abilities and character, where creativity was encouraged over conformity, where making mistakes was seen as part of learning rather than grounds for punishment. Elena had been the driving force behind much of that culture, though she'd insist she was just being herself. She'd started a mentorship program, reaching out to design students at local colleges and offering internships to promising young talent, regardless of their backgrounds or circumstances. She'd initiated a partnership with a non-profit that helped people with disabilities find employment in creative fields. "You're building something bigger than just our company," Marcus had told her, after she'd presented the non-profit partnership idea to the team. "We're building it together," Elena had corrected. "But yes, I want our success to mean something beyond just us. I want other people who've been overlooked or underestimated to have the chances I had to fight for." Now, on a warm September evening, they were hosting a launch party at the office for Anderson Coffee's expansion into California. Sarah Anderson was there, along with many of their other clients and the full Carter and Rodriguez team. The office buzzed with conversation and laughter, the Seattle skyline visible through the windows as the sun set over Puget Sound. Marcus found Elena standing by those windows, holding a glass of wine and looking out at the city lights beginning to flicker on. "You okay?" he asked, joining her. "Just taking it all in," Elena said. "A year ago, I was serving coffee and wondering if I'd ever get a real chance in this industry. Now, I'm a partner in a successful creative agency. It's surreal." "You earned it," Marcus said, and it was something he'd said many times over the past months, but he never tired of saying it. "We both did," Elena replied, "in different ways. You had to learn to see past your own prejudices. That's not easy." "It should be," Marcus said. It should be basic human decency. Should be and is are two different things, Elena said pragmatically. But you made the choice to grow, and that matters. A lot of people never make that choice. They get called out for their prejudices, and they double down instead of opening up. David approached them, slightly tipsy and very happy. Great party, he said, raising his glass. Here's to another successful year, and to the best partnership I've ever seen. They clinked glasses, and Marcus caught Elena's eye over the rim of his wine glass. In that moment, he felt profoundly grateful, not just for the business success, but for the friendship that had grown between them, built on honesty, mutual respect, and the willingness to be vulnerable. "Speech!" someone called out, and soon the whole room was chanting it. Marcus held up his hands in surrender. Okay, I'll keep it short, I promise." The room quieted, everyone turning to face him. "A year ago," Marcus began, "this company was failing, not just financially, but spiritually. I'd lost sight of why I started this business, and I'd surrounded myself with people who wouldn't challenge me when I was wrong." He looked at Elena, who smiled encouragingly. Then someone walked into my office and offered me exactly what I needed, and I was too blind to see it. I judged that person based on surface appearances instead of actual ability. I made assumptions about what clients would want instead of focusing on quality of work, and in doing so, I almost destroyed everything I'd built. The room was completely silent now, everyone listening. But I got a second chance, not because I deserved it, but because Elena Rodriguez is a more generous person than I was. She looked past my cruelty and saw the potential for growth. She gave me the opportunity to prove that I could be better than my worst moment. Marcus raised his glass. "This company's success isn't my accomplishment, it's ours, all of ours. Every person in this room has contributed to building something that matters, something that tells stories worth telling. And I'm grateful every single day that I get to be part of it. But I'm especially grateful to Elena," Marcus continued, his voice becoming more emotional. "For your talent, yes, for your creativity and your vision, but mostly for your courage, for walking back into this office after I'd rejected you, for believing that people can change, for showing me through your example what real resilience looks like." He turned to face her directly. "Your hands didn't save my business despite your scars. They saved it because of everything those scars represent. Your strength, your determination, your refusal to let other people's limitations define your possibilities. You reminded me that the best work comes from people who've overcome something, who've fought for something, who know what it means to not give up even when giving up would be easier." Elena's eyes were shining with tears, but she was smiling. "So here's to Elena," Marcus said, raising his glass higher. "Partner, friend, and the person who saved my business by teaching me how to be human again." The room erupted in applause and cheers. Elena wiped her eyes, laughing and shaking her head at the attention. But Marcus could see that she was touched, that the words meant something to her. As the party continued and people returned to their conversations, Elena pulled Marcus aside. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for saying all that, for meaning it." "I did mean it," Marcus assured her. "Every word." "I know," Elena said. "That's what makes it matter." She held out her scarred hand, and Marcus took it, shaking firmly. But then she pulled him into a brief hug, surprising them both. "We make a good team," she said as they separated. "The best," Marcus agreed. Late that night, after everyone had gone home and the office was quiet again, Marcus stood alone by the windows, looking out at Seattle. The city sparkled below, alive with possibility and promise. He thought about his father's hardware store, closed now for almost 20 years. He thought about the kid he'd been, angry at the world for not valuing what his family had built. He thought about the man he'd become, so focused on success that he'd forgotten what success really meant. And he thought about Elena, about the fire that had scarred her hands and the way she'd refused to let those scars define her limitations. about walking into his office with nothing but her portfolio and her courage, about giving him a second chance when he didn't deserve it. Some people come into our lives and change everything, not because they're perfect, but because they're real. Not because they make things easy, but because they make things matter. Elena had done that for him. She'd taken a failing business and a failing man and reminded them both what they were capable of when they stopped hiding behind surfaces and started focusing on substance. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from his father. "Proud of you, son. Not for your success, but for the person you're becoming. That's what really matters." Marcus smiled and typed back, "Thanks, Dad. I learned from the best." He turned off the lights and headed for the elevator, ready to go home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new clients, new opportunities. But for now, he was content. He'd made a terrible mistake, judged someone unfairly, and nearly destroyed his own life in the process. But he'd been given a second chance, and he'd learned from it. He'd grown from it, and in the end, that was all anyone could ask for. Not perfection, but growth. Not never making mistakes, but learning from them. Not being defined by your worst moment, but by how you chose to move forward from it. As Marcus drove home through the Seattle night, he glanced at his hands on the steering wheel. They were unmarked, unscarred, privileged hands that had never had to fight for anything. But they'd been taught by scarred hands. Hands that had pulled someone from a fire, hands that had refused to give up, hands that had created beautiful things, not despite their scars, but because of everything those scars represented. Hands that had saved his business by first saving his humanity. And for that, Marcus would be grateful for the rest of his life.